So let's talk about this agenda. We are going to see very important topic. So what happens when you actually start working in the real-time project? Let me first of all tell you the background. So when you start working on any real-time project, what happens? You will definitely do testing. But those scenarios which you are actually implementing in the regular code, regular cycle, Apex class, triggers, those activities sometimes you don't like to be called in the test class. For example, you are doing some kind of testing, and because of that testing, or let's say there is a testing on the code which will actually perform the, let's say, integration to other platform, or it will send some email to some specific person, or it will call a batch class, or maybe it will just throw some validation error in the real time, and that you don't want to execute in test class because it will throw error, etc. So in such cases you will be using the option called as bypassing code in test class. Okay, so for example, there are many cases where we want to avoid such avoid some execution to happen on test class level, which is fine if that works on Apex level during non-testing situation. For example, there is a code on pen object. When pen price is less than, or let's say pen price is more than 500, okay, it will perform some integration. Just assume that. Okay, now during testing we don't want that. Assume that, let's say for example, during the testing we don't want that. Or another scenario I would like to give you, and let's say we don't want that, let's say because we are using, or we are creating 30-40 records for testing purpose, and then 30-40 times without any need it will do integration to other platform. That is absolutely not needed. Or such like this, there can be many cases where we want to avoid some code in testing. Now this is one example, but what I'm going to do, I'm going to give you some additional examples, because this concept is to understand at what situation we need to use this. Using process is very simple. It's just using one function. That's not difficult for you. But the important thing is to understand the situation. For that purpose only, I just taken this topic, because sometimes in the interviews they ask this question, and you need to understand how to bypass a specific code. So I'll talk about my scenarios, or Intellogic's project scenarios, in what cases in our company we have actually used this. So let's talk about some project scenarios of Intellogic. So when we are setting up some test data from Apex test method, I hope you remember this, that we discussed in the past, that in the Apex class we can create a test data also for practice purpose. Now that data can be huge, hundreds of records can be possible. So trigger may fire many times because of that. So in this case, you don't want a specific code to work, or trigger may fire, and then that can call some code in trigger or connected Apex, which we don't want in testing. That can be the case. Or let's say in test data, or let's say due to test data we are going to create, it might cause the SQL queries also. Let's say for example, in the test data we are firing some queries to the database, but we are doing testing with lots of data, or we are doing lots of testing. with large number of records, and because of that it's going more than 100 queries, and this is something we don't want, let's say. So this also we don't want during testing. Let's say we are creating some kind of data, and at that time we don't want it should just call this kind of queries, etc. Or it is not necessary to, so for example, also it is not uh, necessary to disable, or let's say proper to disable the trigger for every test case, and then do testing and then again enable trigger. This is also not a proper way. So you are getting frustrated that every time trigger is getting called in the testing process and you don't want to call that, and you're disabling the trigger and you're doing the testing and again all these things. So again, this is also not proper way. Just because your specific code is getting called, let's say batch class, so is getting called due to code in, or this is due to code during testing. You are not interested in calling the batch class, or let's say integrations also there. Okay, so integration code is getting called due to code in test process. So in all such cases it becomes very difficult to actually then manage the things, because it's taking unnecessary action which we don't need that. And another important thing, so bypassing the validation in testing. So for example, what will happen in some cases, let's say there is a code which you want to bypass in the test. For example, what will happen, so if you talk about the previous scenario where we have discussed that, let me just show you here. So I'm going to just show you that code. So let me just show you. So this is the trigger, and let me go to the Apex class because I want to show that in the Apex class. So here also you can understand one good use of this functionality. I'll just show you. Where is that code? Apex class. Just 1 minute. Let me show you. Now you can see this one. Now here is one more useful case for you. Suppose we are doing test class for this functionality. We are writing test class for this functionality. Now there is going to be a problem. In the test class, what we need to do, we are always going to focus on the coverage, right? We are going to always focus on maximum coverage, more than 75 also. Now if I'm writing test class for this, okay, and during that, let's say I created a record that you already know how to create that. In the test class we created the record, and let's say we intentionally kept the value of the pen equal to 0 or maybe -1 for testing purpose. So what will happen, let's say one function you are creating in the test class, and in that you are mentioning value 105, then 75, then 56, then 25. Yeah, okay, good. All code is getting covered. Then finally you wrote a function that is price equal to -1 and you submitted the record. So that is only for testing purpose. Okay, we wanted to just see the testing working or not. And now the control will come here in this page, and in that code, suppose, listen carefully, in this code, let's say for example some code is present like this. Some code is present, okay, lots of lines are present, and finally because of some situation you are throwing error. Okay, now this also you want to test. Now the thing is, if you don't test this else block or this block, what will happen, these many lines will become red and the percentage of your test coverage will come down. Assume that these lines are 100 lines like this, these are 100 lines, assume that. So if you say that actually if I'm just going to pass the value, so what will happen, listen carefully, Suppose I pass the create the record in the test class for testing purpose to this code. I mentioned the value -1. It will come here, it will come to this line and it will throw error, and the test class will get failed. Test class will get failed and your result will be 0% code coverage because there was an issue in the test class. If you bypass this function, then what about these lines? These lines will be red color. Okay, that one line is a problem. Fine, I can understand. But because you're bypassing this functionality, then these many lines are getting red and this percentage will be less. So you got the problem? Everyone got the problem? If you bypass this function, red lines are there. If you call this function or that is that code, then it's getting error because whenever you execute this during the test class, it will throw error and test class will be failed. Everyone clear? Both side we are having situations. Then in the next 1 minute, I'm going to tell you the solution for this. Everyone got it? Great, fantastic. So please note, if I pass the value -1, then it will throw error because line number 36 is going to make this test class with error and it's going to create 0% code coverage. If I bypass, okay, let's get rid of this line. I don't want this and I'm going to not create any such record. Okay, then code will never come here and all my lines will be red. My code coverage is becoming 60, 65. That's also a big problem. Then Salesforce says, whenever you have such kind of code, which you think should be only called during the normal execution, you don't want that to be in the test class, do one thing, very simple, just do one thing. At the beginning of that line, you mention this. Test.isRunningTest equal to false. Means if this is not a test class and this check is false, means this is not a test class, then only call this line. If it is a test class, don't call this line. And this way you have a very fantastic solution to ensure that in the live scenarios this will throw error, but in the test class it will not throw error. Okay, everyone clear? Got this technique? It's a very famous technique we use regularly in many classes in the real-time project. Great, good to see that almost everyone saying clear. Yes, this you can use in the real-time project and you are going to use regularly. Okay, just put this code and this way you can just add this functionality. So I'm going to just copy and paste here and explain you the code. So how we can do this? So please note, whatever your code is, just put. So I'm going to show you the example code. Okay, so whatever code is there, whatever code you don't want to call during the test functionality, just write this and that will bypass during the testing process. Okay, so please note this point. Any questions from this? This is also very much useful scenario and this kind of questions also come in the interview. How you are going to bypass the specific piece of code during the test. Okay, all clear? Great, fantastic.